Hi guys and welcome. This is Gabby with Blooming Within Education. So this first series is going to be strictly about pregnancy, kind of starting it from the very basic, and then we're going to work ourselves week by week all the way to the very end and then move on from there to childbirth and a little extras at the very end. Mental health is going to be a huge section at the end of each of my series. So that is coming, and I'm going to talk about things as well as the week goes on. But it's basically going to go week by week, giving you a guide. In the end, will be kind of weirder things that aren't necessarily always true or always the case, but sometimes it's good to know. And then a chunk of it will be talking about mental health during pregnancy. So in the very beginning, I'm going to do anatomy. And you can definitely hear my fish in the background. This is the best light and the best background in the house and away from all my cats and everything, so get used to it. And I thought it'd be a nice little ambiance while I'm talking. Also, if you see me looking over there, it's because I have my twins turned all the way down so you don't hear any of the rain. So I'm just checking to make sure they're not awake. Okay, so while I do this as well, I'm going to be throwing up pictures and basically talking about the diagram itself, and then it'll come back to me when I do an explanation. So if you see a picture, I'm going to start from the top all the way down to the bottom, and they're all completely labeled so that you can follow along very easily. I'm going to be doing a female born birthing person's body, which is necessary for, being able to be pregnant, and then a male body to basically explain the anatomy, how every part of this works, specifically to do with conception and getting pregnant. And also, I'm a huge believer in birthing person. I understand out there this world is, making huge changes and things like this. And that's why I say that. So if that offends you, I'm very sorry, but everyone deserves to feel great. But birthing person means a female born body because that is required for pregnancy. So that's what I'm talking about. So, that being said, let's get started. This beautiful reproductive system right here. And from the top, you're going to see the ureter, fallopian tubes, ovary, the uterus, cervix, bladder, vagina, the pubic bone, the clitoris, urethra, and then the labia minora and the labia majora. So, starting at the really top, the ureter takes pee from bladder. That's true for both men and women. Fallopian tubes are what's carrying the eggs from the ovary to the uterus and is also ideally where conception is happening. You really want that egg to meet the sperm in the fallopian tube on its way down, and it's just the prime time for hormones and easiest time maturity wise for the sperm and the egg to meet. Next is ovary. Obviously, this is where eggs are made, stored, matured, fertilized, and popped out. And we'll go into depth about all of these things as well. And then you're going to have the cervix, which is the basically opening of the doorway, if you will, from the vagina to the uterus. It's that very specific hole right there in between those, because the vagina is the tunnel-like organ leading up to the cervix, and on the other side of the cervix is the uterus. So then, like I said, we have the vagina, which is past the cervix and all the way to the hole. That is strictly the vaginal part. And then your pubic bone is right in the front. It's just a bone to try to keep that protected, especially when you are pregnant. And that was actually found out after years and years of research of women's bodies, is it's really to keep your vagina safe, essentially. Then we have our clitoris, which is super cool, and I love to tell people, is one of the only parts in a mammal's body that is designed for pleasure. The clitoris has no other known reasons to be there on the body for anything other than pleasure. Then you have your urethra, which is your pee hole, and the tube that leads also to, the tube. Your urethra is the hole right there, and then the ureter is what goes to the bladder itself. And then labium minora and majora are the two sides of the lips. So the inner lips and then the outer lips. These are the parts that people I love that people make famous of being completely different sizes for absolutely everyone. The depth of the vagina is also another thing that's completely different. And, sadly, society has put it on us to make us think that it's not and they're all the same. But even within my friend group, all of us have completely different vaginas. And so it's just one of those things that we shouldn't be embarrassed about if there's no reason for it. It's the same as the way our face looks, is the way our outside of our vagina looks. It's just the way we were born. It's the way it grew. That's it. It's the same as penis. The brain has a huge, huge, huge part of everything to do with our reproductive system, from menstrual cycles to conception to pregnancy. And so I'm going ahead and put a diagram of a brain. And this is the basic diagram of a brain. It goes down to even smaller pieces. But really, the two things that we really need to know specifically for the reproductive system is the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. It's actually extremely small and it's in the inner brain, but those are two powerhouses of the brain, let alone the control center of our reproductive system. So it's important just for you to just see this is what it looks like. I think is really funny about the brain, and I'm just going to throw this in, and it's the same. I got a picture so you can see. And the top photo is a woman's brain not pregnant. A bottom photo is a woman's brain pregnant. And as you can see, it's a lot smoother on the bottom, and that's actually because our brain matter volume goes down immensely when we're pregnant. And for a really long time, they couldn't exactly figure out why that happened. But now their biggest guess that makes the most sense to me as well is that it's making it so the neurons have way shorter of a distance to reach important parts of the body and the brain. So now it's kind of assumed, we don't exactly know, but it is assumed that they're doing this for the sake of a better nerve cell connection to protect the baby and to keep the baby born and for to protect mom as well, and make sure that those signals are being sent from baby to mom and from mom to baby and continue on for the months. So the next part of the birthing person I'm going to show is the breast. And here's a diagram. It's, basically if you slice down the middle and then looking at it, from the front. There is a couple of the same things said, but it's just so you can see and kind of get an idea of what, when you're looking straight on a breast and then from the side. So we have our breast, the chest wall, and that is essentially the muscle between your bones and your breast. So the chest muscle is there. And for anyone wondering, with a top surgery, that's actually what they're kind of breaking it down to, because that's what men only have, is the chest wall. And then a normal fat layer will grow on the outside of that. In men's bodies, their fat grows underneath, or I meant to say underneath. Their fat grows underneath, and that's where the look of breasts come from on bigger men. But they really just have a chest wall. So you're trying to get down to the chest wall if you don't want breasts. But anywho, then we have our ligaments, just move it because it's a muscle. And then we have our pectoral muscle, which is the same in both men and women. And, your pecs are muscles, so that's why you need your ligaments to help them move. And then we have the lobules and ducts, ribs, and then the fatty tissue, which essentially makes your breast size. And fatty tissue, we can only control so much. How our breasts grow, it has a lot to do with puberty and hormones, so everyone's breasts are different. And it's the same thing as the outside of a vagina. Depends on how you grow, depends on your genetics. There's only so much you can do about it, besides some surgery if you'd like. Some of breasts are actual fat, and if you do lose weight, you can tend to lose weight in your breast, but only some. Some people just have naturally very large breasts. Now, if you're looking on the right side and straight on, it's just showing you the blood vessels that come down, which are a huge factor in breastfeeding and breastfeeding mothers. When you can kind of see their veins popping out, it's because there's so much blood flow going through their breast right now, trying to produce milk and making sure it has all the nutrients and the transfer is going, which it normally doesn't. So you would see that prominently on women / the birthing person's body if they were breastfeeding all the time or had milk in their breast all the time, but they don't. So that's why we don't see it all the time. And then you can see that it's the pec and the lymph nodes, which are actually one of the top things in women that get breast cancer is the lymph nodes. And that's why they say for you to go check all the way to your armpit, because those are so essential in breast shots. Then you can see the areola, which is the circle around your nipple and the nipple. And just like the fatty tissue on your breasts, everybody's nipples are completely different. It has everything to do with hormones, growth, puberty, all of these things. They change when you're pregnant. They change after you're pregnant. They change after you breastfeed if you choose to do so. They change even if you don't choose to breastfeed. Nipples just change. I have had my nipples transition now multiple times from puberty to my first, to my second, and third. So, and then now that's kind of everything that anatomy-wise, diagram-wise, you need to see about that. So I'm going to start now. I'm going to start with the top of the body and work my way down with each of these body parts now that you've seen them and what they have to do with reproductive system, our reproductive system as a female-born birthing person. So with the tippy top, as I said, volume size shrinks. That has to do with your brain fog and feeling tired and only feeling so much, because only so much of you can be given to yourself and the outside world when you're pregnant, because your brain is completely taken over by growing this human and protecting the human. It's just natural primal instinct. And so that is what the volume necessarily has to do with. It doesn't really do with much else. It's just the way, sadly, mom's brain functions for herself. But don't worry, the baby is okay and will be okay and will be number one priority for the most part. So the hypothalamus, we'll start there, produces a hormone known as GnRH. And it's, I'm terrible with these names, so please don't, again, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person, and that is an educator. Gonadotropin releasing hormones, and these are to regulate production and the release of FSH. Wow. And that's your follicle stimulating hormone, which obviously, when you know about the ovary, follicles are essentially what make the ovary and mature it, which we'll go into deeper when we start talking about that. So they are essential for menstrual cycles, pregnancy, conceiving, all of it. If that process does not happen, you are not going to have a proper menstrual cycle and you are not going to conceive. That is one of the issues of fertility, is looking at these two hormones and seeing if they are elevating when they should be within your menstrual cycle. So those are those things that you pay attention to. And they are also paying attention to those if you're trying to conceive or the very beginning of your pregnancy, to see how liable this pregnancy actually is going to be. Because sometimes those can be elevated and then it ends up not being a full-term pregnancy, or the body doesn't accept it because those aren't where they should be, but the egg was still released. Hypothalamus also regulates and releases LH, which is your luteinizing hormone in the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is essentially goes hypothalamus, which then sends information to the pituitary gland. So within this, the rate and the magnitude of GnRH pulses from the hypo to regulate the hypothalamus, to regulate the release of FSH and LH from the pituitary. So hypothalamus is the control center still here, but it's telling the pituitary, release this, let's go, which is why they pay attention to it, because that is telling the eggs what to do. And so if that is not at an increased rate like it should be, then it's not telling the pituitary what needs to be done, or maybe the pituitary it's decreased dramatically by the time it gets to pituitary gland, which it's not going to send the right message because it's not getting what it should be. And I just say this because I think people should really know about the parts of fertility, and sometimes doctors aren't the best at explaining it. So on top of it, within these, your menstrual cycle is regulated by this complex hormone interaction. So if your menstrual cycle is not going properly, something is wrong there. Something between those three are not working correctly, and that's where you need to pay attention. And I share this on my Instagram. I'm looking for more people on my Facebook, but there are said to be a lot of minerals and vitamins that link to these hormones and the proper function of hypothalamus and pituitary. And that seems to be one of the main things that I've noticed recently in times, which now realistically in science, we're just now really understanding PCOS and infertility issues, and we're kind of understanding why it isn't working. Now, do we always have a fix? No. Are they going to lead you to believe it? Yes. That's just my thoughts on Big Pharma and other things. But there are some doctors out there, and especially holistic individuals and nutritionists, I've noticed a ton, that are dedicated to try to help you with these hormone releases, try to help you with the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, and really understand how the menstrual cycle works, and know that that's where you should start when you're trying to do this. So that's where a lot of these people are saying they ate differently. That's why, is because it's come to find out that these minerals, these vitamins are linked to these hormones, on top of there are also things linked to hypothalamus and pituitary gland, and it's been now studied so much that there has a ton of evidence over when people have more vitamin A, they have a better progesterone level, things like that. So that's where they want to start. So then you don't have to fight against your own body with that. You're adding things into your body to help this function properly. It's so important to keep your brain level-headed, and it's so hard because it's so emotionally hard, but you have to keep your brain level-headed so the brain function is not messing with the proper production of these hormones. So we're going to head on down to the vagina and the uterus and our female-born reproductive system. So in the ovary, the follicles release our eggs. As the follicle and egg grow together, which they grow together, the follicle swells and the egg starts to grow and mature more. We may be born with them, but they need to grow and mature. They're immature until they reach the follicle and start to do that. It also produces a hormone called inhibin, which tells the hypo and the pituitary gland to decrease the release of FSH since the egg has been made. I'm sorry, I literally spit over my thing, so maybe one day I'll do better. But you know what? Maybe for a video. This is essentially when now we've gone from the brain, we've gone down to the ovary, we've gone to the follicle. The follicle has an egg, it is swelling, and it is now maturing this egg. Because of this, we don't need these two hormones to be raging anymore. So all of what's going on in the brain, we need to send information back through the nerves and say, hey, I'm good, I got a good egg, we're going to go this route now. So the brain has to do something else, but those are now decreased, which I had just talked about. So then we go estrogen up, which is why I say the brain has more things to do. It's telling us now, those we don't need anymore, but we do need to raise the estrogen because of maturing the egg and starting the essential menstrual process. And once it's mature enough to release off the follicle is essentially when the estrogen reaches a certain level. This signals the LH to rise again to finish the egg's maturity and start ovulation. So it needs to decrease and increase. So now, at this point, the LH is going to have it go down the fallopian tube. This is, the follicle has released the egg, it's exiting the ovary and entering the fallopian tube. After ovulation, the follicle turns into corpus luteum, which produces progesterone, which is telling the uterus wall to thicken for the egg's implantation. So, now, the egg, like I said, is released, and once that's released, technically the follicle turns into something different, and now the follicle is producing progesterone, which is another thing the brain is signaling for the follicle to do. And this is telling the uterine wall to thicken, because it's saying, hey, I let my egg out, you need to thicken, because either you're going to have a baby or we're going to release this wall because you didn't have a baby, aka implantation. This process that goes on in the ovary is also another huge issue with birthing people. with fertility is the estrogen levels and the progesterone levels that are needed to push the egg out and down the fallopian tube, and the progesterone to create a thick enough wall for the egg and the sperm to be able to properly implant once they have turned into the division of cells and the zygote. This is another huge thing that's a problem. And I personally, in my opinion, think this is such an issue because it's not just one organ doing this. It's bouncing between the brain and the ovary and the brain, and something else is changing, and you have to fluctuate these levels at just the right, amount to be able to do this, which is difficult for, if you think about it on the outside looking in, it's difficult. So then, if there's no implantation, the wall is then released through a period, and that's when you have your period. And you're ovulating from the time that the egg is leaving all the way attempting to the uterus, and then when it's like, oh, JK, then you're having your period, which essentially, if you know, is a 2-week period. It takes around 2 weeks for the egg and the follicle to grow, to mature, to release. Then you have your ovulation, and then you have your period once the egg, another 2 weeks to release and go down to the wall and or exit within a period. These steps are the hugest parts of infertility. Hugest. And I don't even think that's a word. But it's just something that, in my opinion, I've never gone to infertility, but I've done a lot of research on it. I have a sibling that struggles with infertility because she has PCOS. And luckily she knows why, but it's just, I don't think people are given the information they should be before they even go there. And sometimes I think it should be given by the OB. And unless you're asking these questions, they normally aren't giving. And even when you're asked to some, they won't give you these things in full details. But that's why hormones are so important. And that's what they're checking on the blood test. That's why they're checking it so often, and you have to get so much blood drawn and all of these things, is because the levels have to be at the perfect amounts at these different rates, and literally within days they need to be different, which is the same within pregnancy. Every week it's totally different, but these first 2 to 3 weeks are so important just to even get started, not even to claim the baby and get her going. So now we're going to move on to the breast. And I'm just going on the breast because technically the next part would be, the male-born body. But I'm going to do the breast really quick. Just because I think, I showed the diagram, so why not know the information about it? So the lobules are what, everything's there. Those are the parts of your breast. But the lobules are what produce the milk which enters into a milk duct leading to the nipple. So it goes from one to the other to the other. And lobules are the part that sees blood vessels so it can reach all the nutrients that needs to be passed on from mom to baby. And so that's why we say that the filtration is higher than that was believed a long time ago. And that thought process between what mom ingests to what gets to baby is so minimal, I can't even express to you, because it's being transferred by blood on top of going through 2 organs that are specifically made to make sure that there's nothing wrong with this milk. If so, it ends up doing a process essentially rejecting the milk, and it can lead to an infection. And that's why they say, there's just so much filtration, and what's left in your blood is the important parts of anything that you have. So if anything you have doesn't have any minerals, nutrients, anything of that kind that your body wants, it's going to be exited out of your body for the majority of the part. It's very, very minimal what goes through the nipple. Very, very minimal. So now moving on to the men's parts before we do conception is here is the men's penis. I don't have their brain a part of this, but the same parts of the brain have to do with the same thing with men. It's just sending them different messages. And our brains are no different. It's just, not diagram sense. How about that? So, as you can see, there's the bladder, the seminal vesicle, prostate, urethra, penis, epididymis, vas deferens, testicle, and scrotum. There's a little more depth names of these things, but this is the basic idea that you need to know. So, to go into detail of the parts that have to do with conception. The seminal vascular produces fructose, proteins, enzymes, and mucus to feed the sperm. And both form the ejaculatory duct. There are two of them. So, they are not only creating food for the sperm, which are in the testicles, and this food is what's giving these sperm all that mother effing energy to go find that egg. So that's why it is essential. And they don't really need necessarily, they're getting all that they need within the testicle. This is literally simultaneously happening within the urethra on its way out as the men are getting hard, and it's prepping for ejaculation and then ejaculation. And it has to be quick like that because sperm dies so fast. So they just give them this huge boost of energy and they're like, go get it, dogs. And they all go off. So it's a very fast process. And I will say, I know a lot about women's bodies for my own self, learning things and investing. And I really started with the penis male birth bodies because of everything that I'm trying to do here. And I will say it's so much fun, and you totally understand why men act the way that they do because everything's fast and in a hurry down there. There are also hormones that are telling it to do this, which in fertility, I should have looked and I did not do a very good job at looking what hormones do this. I'm very sorry. I just looked up functions. But there are hormones that are telling you to do this, and that feeding part can be a very large problem for men with their fertility issues because their seminal vasculars are not producing the right amount of food that is needed for all of the sperm or, whatever the case may be. And this is where the term lazy sperm are coming from, is you're not getting the oomph that they need to be able to reach the fallopian tube, which again, like I have said, is the ideal place for, the meeting of the egg and the sperm to happen. The next thing is this fluid formed the fluid form that they make is actually around 50 to 80%. Around 20 to 50% is the sperm itself, and then this food and mucus is literally what they're swimming in. That is the majority of the semen. And so they're like, that's why they can all just like engulf all of this food so they get the go and go, And if that liquid is none or not even like worthy of the energy that's being given, you're not going to go anywhere, which sucks, but that is what happens. Stays in the vasculars until ejaculation, and then a strong muscle contraction happens, which is the, and that's what pushes the fluid down. So it's kind of sitting there ready to go once you regularly start masturbating and having sex. That kind of starts regularly sitting there for the most part, which is a lot of, if you don't have sex for a while or masturbate for a while, that's actually what's the congealed part of sperm, which I found out, which I think is crazy, and also something that my husband and I have dealt with, where if we haven't had sex for a while, that is congealed, and we're like, what the fuck is that? Come to find out, it's actually the food. And those obviously aren't very good sperm because that's been congealed. It's just been sitting too long, and it's because the male reproductive system gets used to having sex or masturbating on a regular basis, and if all of a sudden that slows way down, then it has it sitting there for like a really long time. Now, if it's used to you not masturbating or anything like that for a while, then it kind of just diminishes up to a point. So then the prostate is kind of the next part of this, and it produces the fluid that nourishes and transports the sperm. So this is it goes into this next, and the prostate mixes in with the food and makes it slippery, if you will. Nice and slippery. It moves all the things together. It's kind of like the water that mixes the other two foods, the sperm and the food together. Mix it all nice and beautiful. And then the epididymis creates, stores, carries, and matures sperm from the testicles. So that bad boy is making those sperm ready to go. It is saying, hey, I need the food. Hey, I need that out of the prostate, my little water. Hey, I need the sperm out of the testicles. They're the mixing bowl right there, baby. And they're mixing it and baking it until it's to perfection. And then when it's mature and ejaculation comes, the urethra moves it all on out, which it also moves the bladder, so it's connected to two things. And boom, baby, comes right on out. So the vast difference matures or moves mature sperm from the urethra or to the urethra in prep of ejaculation. Now that is the part that happens as you're getting hard. So all of these other things, they're kind of all happening all at once. But the main part of as men are getting hard is this mature sperm, and all of these things are now done. It's done in the epididymis and it's moving itself to the vas deferens. And the vas deferens is going to connect to the urethra. That's the connection right there, those two tubes. And that's going to shoot that bad boy out for you. So that's all the parts. And then we have our actual conception itself. We're going back to the female born body. And during its journey down the tube to the uterine wall is the ideal time to meet the egg and the sperm. Like I said, within the fallopian tube, during the ovulation 2-week period, you want to have that. It's better to have it closer to the curve. And if you're looking here, I'm going to put the vagina back up. The curve right there between the fallopian tube and the uterine is the perfect spot, ideally. For some reason, timing, hormones, what's going on, that seems to be the perfect spot. But anytime within the fallopian tube, they need to be meeting. And once they meet, this is now called the zygote. And the division starts of cells. It does not take long. Once they connect and this egg and sperm actually agree, which is another thing that has to do with fertility, which again is mainly hormone based. It's mainly, how the egg is, how the sperm is. If they're both perfect, everything's going on right in the body, they're going to call a zygote. And it's just going to divide and 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 keep dividing until a fetus is born. Before that starts, while it's dividing still, it's going to keep traveling down the fallopian tube until it meets the uterine wall, which is called implantation. Once it reaches 100 cells, which is about a week, it's called the blastocyst. This is the main part that meets the endometrium or the wall. This is what sticks on your blastocyst. And then the cells continue to divide, and once that implantation is really nice, which again, another step of this that fertility takes a huge effect on. Now once this implants, everything is perfect, blastocyst is there. Now the cells are going to keep dividing, but this is essentially where it goes from half the cells are going to go into creating a placenta, the other half are going to be creating this fetus. And the hormones released to tell body a baby is growing now, which means this whole process of conception has happened and it's implanted. It's going good. Your body, your uterus has accepted it. Now we're going back up to the brain, going back up to the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus and telling them, hey, we have a baby, it's working. And it's set, and it's going to say, oh, here's your HCG, which is probably 3 letters. You know more than the rest of the hormones I said, which is the human chronic gonadotropin. I'm terrible with these names. I'm sure I'm going to get butchered by people. But either way, this is what people are looking at if you've had miscarriages, if you're doing a fertility journey in the beginning of your pregnancy. When you find out you're pregnant during a blood test, they are looking at this. This number needs to be skyrocketed in the first few weeks. Huge, massive amounts after implantation. Why? Because these are the most important parts for when the fetus is actually being born in the placenta. And the fetus and the placenta need to be divided up properly and start to actually form in order for the pregnancy to continue on and not have a miscarriage, which is sadly where miscarriages start, is that does not work or does not last long enough, or your HCG is not staying up high enough the way it should be. And fun fact, I had twins, and when I had my blood test that I was pregnant, my HCG was not much higher than average. So even though you have multiples, it don't mind it. So it's like a little surprise every time. And then the embryo develops after 3 to 8 weeks, and it eventually becomes a fetus at 9 weeks. So 9 weeks is the perfect time to kind of get past the main first part of miscarriage. Now, I'm not saying miscarriage doesn't happen after that. Obviously it does. But that is the first hump you really want to get a part of, because now at this point you have a placenta and you have a fetus, and they are separated and now they're formed. So now we can start rocking and forming an actual human itself, which I will go into. And these, I am going week by week. So starting with week 1 and then working all the way to week 40. I'm going week by week. You're going to get an understanding of what's going on in your body. What should you be doing? What are you feeling? What's going to happen at the doctor's? What are the major risks this week? And that's going to include this first couple months that I basically went over with conception. And I kind of went over some stuff this time, and it might be repeated in those weeks. But I just wanted the basic anatomy and the basic idea of conception said so that we can kind of move into pregnancy now. I am not comfortable enough to talk about infertility until I do a little more research. So I'm just doing and saying the parts that I know that have to do with infertility and miscarrying and essentially like that, and any research that comes up when I start doing more into my week by week. But I will be eventually down the line doing a series regarding infertility. I just don't know exactly when that will happen because I want to do my research. I don't want to give you guys bullshit. Now, as you can tell, I am not a doctor or a nurse. I'm just an educator. I'm a person dedicated to this and very invested and very interested and fixated on this subject. I am an educator. I am certified in that sense. And what I'm saying is not untruthful, but just know, I'm a human. I don't have the exacts. I'm not going to say things correctly all the time. And you can definitely tell me how to say them in the comments. I'll gladly listen. But, I'm a very bringing it to human terms kind of person. Okay? So if you have any questions, comment below. And if you have anything specifically about week 1 or 2 or 3, which will be my next 3 videos, let me know. And that's the main part of conception.